I got a little story about all the goats that you see on the hill behind me. This morning I'm in Pinole, California, and over the last few years I've watched this habitat get worse and worse, and they unleash the goats on it every year, supposedly to help it. But my question for you today is, where do you think these goats come from, and what do you think their lifespan is? The reason I ask is because several years earlier I discovered the origin of these sorts of goats when I was at a goat dairy farm, a small one down in Pescadero, California. And I saw 3-day-old goats that had been put in their own pen and taken from their mothers so that we could have the mother's milk for our own products that we want to consume. And the sign said that the baby goats will be sold or given to goat grazing companies. So there they are. And it's just a, if you market it the right way, it sounds great. Oh, they literally say this: we took the babies from the mother to prevent the bond between a mother and a child. So that was supposedly an act of kindness, so that we could harvest mother's milk instead of letting the babies have their mothers or the milk. But the cycle continues in that then these males that are quote-unquote worthless to the dairy industry then move over into a sector of the meat industry, which then has a spin-off company where they actually charge cities and communities for this urban grazing program, which comes through and supposedly helps the habitat, which I have more evidence that it does the exact opposite. So on our dime and at the expense of the mothers and the children themselves, these goats get fattened up on the wild habitat of public land while spreading even more invasive plants and destroying everything in their path. Then, since there's an endless supply of more baby male goats coming in, these goats that have gotten fattened on our dime are then slaughtered and sold into the meat industry because there's plenty to replace them as we keep producing more babies. This is all one big circle. Meat and dairy coming together, lying to us about good things when it's all them profiting at our expense and the expense of our habitat and the expense of any wild animals that wanted to use this habitat. There are two common excuses for this urban grazing. One is to combat invasive plants and help the native plants. Two, it's to control wildfires. People talk about how goats will eat anything, and that's supposed to make them good for getting rid of invasive plants. But as you can see behind me, these goats are eating the tops of these plants. And as I'll demonstrate, that leaves plenty of the rest of the plant still to burn, still to be a fire hazard. The only thing that's actually happening here is that these goats are coming through and eating the choicest parts of the plants. And they are also doing that to the trees, getting any green leaves that are within reach. Tips: consumed. Combustible plant remains. Here's the tree after the goats came through. Anything within reach has been stripped bare. You can see the difference once we get up here, out of reach. So native or invasive, it hardly matters. These goats are eating anything that's edible. but they're still being selective about it, which means they're eating anything that was potentially edible for the native animals and not leaving anything desirable behind, while still leaving the potential fire hazard. Nothing was accomplished here except to leave a blanket of shit from animals that don't belong in this habitat while eating the choicest amounts of plants from here to fatten up animals that are part of the meat industry, while selling it as a positive thing to the taxpayers. This is not a benefit to public lands. This is not a benefit to the public. This is not a benefit to the taxpayers. But as long as we have these fires and people are scared to death of fires, and you hear people telling you a lie about how this is a public service, people are anxious to grab hold of it. Think about it logically. Am I or am I not still sitting in a fire hazard? And ask yourself, why are the fire suppressant solutions being unleashed now that we're in the rainy season instead of during the drought? Some of you are saying, well, you know, a 3-foot plant is better than a 6-foot plant. You sure about that? With high winds and a fire that's out of control, the difference between total destruction is a 3-foot plant versus a 6-foot plant. This is after the goats have come through and provided their fire suppressant service. And this is an opportune moment to point out that these annual invasive plants that shouldn't even be here and have replaced the native perennial plants, are here because of agriculture, are here because of livestock grazing. And yet it is the livestock industry that tells us that grazing is necessary to suppress the problem that they created. They are the problem. Presenting more of that problem is not going to solve the problem. And as I've already mentioned, we're now in the rainy season, or as rainy as it gets for us these days. Where were these goats during the actual fire threat, if they were a solution to the fire threat? That's the one that was hobbling behind, wheezing like it has pneumonia. Can't seem to keep up. You'll be slaughtered soon. Hear him breathing?